debate happening with Azgerod and perspective philosophy. And for this debate, Azgerod's taking the view that the Christian God is almost certainly non-existent, and perspective philosophy is going to be taking the opposition. It'll just be a normal back and forth debate, and as always, we'll put a voting poll at the very end of the debate for the audience that was here for at least 75% of the debate to vote on who they think performed better. So Azgerod, since you're taking the affirmative, you just want to open up and give your position, you can go for it.
So I'm arguing that the Christian God almost certainly doesn't exist. So there's a couple things to unpack in there, namely, like, what exactly is the Christian God, and then how do we determine if something is almost certainly non-existent? So I'll talk about the latter first. So when I say that it's almost certainly non-existent, the main question is almost certainly. This is a question of probability. What is the probability of the Christian God existing? And I'm claiming that it's below a certain threshold, and below that threshold, I say that, if a proposition has a probability that's below this threshold, then I say it's almost certainly it's almost certainly false. And so the proposition in question here is the Christian God exists, and I'm saying that the probability of that proposition being true is below this threshold. So we could talk a little bit about the threshold. My starting kind of offer is a probability of 1 in 1,000. I think we'll disagree plenty, even just with that threshold, because it sounds like you're saying it's 50-50, 0.5 probability.
But actually, I think that it's epistemologically improvable. So I think that the to talk about the existence or non-existence of the divine is fundamentally misguided, pointless.
Right.
It's the word I would use.
Right. So basically the means that I show is, like, I'm just saying, like, okay, the probability is below this level, and I use a little bit of probability theory to figure out how to assess that. So it's just like we assess the prior probability. I use the uniform prior method, where I say that all of the equally specific alternatives to the hypothesis are equally probable, so that the probability of any given one of them is 1 divided by the number of those alternatives. So first, like, we would assess the prior probability, and then we'd use Bayes' theorem to incorporate any evidence for or against the proposition being true. But I'm guessing we're not going to get that far. So why don't you tell me? Why do you think it's, like, kind of? I'm getting the idea that you think, like, the Christian God is kind of unreachable. So what's that about?
Yeah, I would say that it's ontologically distinct from what we can or cannot access in terms of evidentiary claims. I guess the reason I'd say that for is because of the definition of the Christian God. I will agree in that it's an omnibenevolent, an omniscient, omnibenevolent, omnipotent creator and sustainer of all things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool. If we're taking that definition, I would say that a Christian God is usually seen as necessary, non-contingent, absolute, and goes beyond human faculties in terms of what knowledge claims we can make. I'd say that we can talk about God through analogy or via negativa. I can tell you what isn't God, but I can't tell you what is. The concept of God being, essentially the greatest conceivable being, if we accept that, then I would say that it is non-conceivable, and the only one that could have evidence of God's existence would be God himself.
Okay. I am willing to grant that I can grant that it's impossible to, kind of gain evidence for or against God, but that is not sufficient to negate my argument, because the prior probability can be very low on its own without taking any evidence into account.
I think the issue is that, like, I guess this is the way I look at it. Like, when we look at what is a God in this sense, we're looking at whether God could be the cause of creation, or whether in terms of existence itself. Like, we normally look to God in terms of, like, when for example, something like Aquinas' 5 proofs or something, they try to prove God through, like, the necessary causal sequence of events, like the necessary foundation of a causal sequence of events. or like the or Aquinas even goes so far to say it's like the end, of everything, essentially the measure of being and goodness. I guess my point is that we can genuinely hypothesize on first causes, or an infinite regress of causes, but I think that's ontologically distinct from where we exist in terms of what we have access to. We can hypothesize, that's fine, but we can't really make a middle term. There's no way that we can, instantiate our conclusions on that. And so, coming to any probability, going it is the case that God doesn't exist, or it isn't the case, or it is more or less likely, seems to point that we could gain some sort of evidence for or against the existence of God. Or do you disagree?
It depends on our definition of evidence, but I would take evidence to be some kind of observation or fact, such that if the fact is true, it lowers the probability of the hypothesis in question being true. So under that definition, yes, it means you cannot gain evidence about that. But me saying probability, me assessing the probability of God does not require evidence to be taken into account in order for me to do so. You could say that me assessing the prior probability of God as being low is a form of evidence. But yeah, I guess my first question is, why do you believe that one cannot gain evidence for or against the Christian God?
I would say that it's more in the terms of when it's with it being defined almost as an absolute, perfect being. I'd say that we can have. It's not to say that, let's say if you were to take something like the fine tuning argument or something like that, or the problem of evil, right? Both are trying to essentially establish, the likelihood of the existence of God, one positive and one negative, essentially. One essentially tries to argue from one of the faculties of God that the existence of God, the existence of God is impossible because God, being all loving, is incompatible with this world. And all of my understanding of the problem of evil is that this has never been instantiated. We've never managed to create an argument which has actually managed to reach a point in which we go look, actually the amount of suffering in this world is absolutely incompatible logically with the existence of an omnibenevolent being, and it can't be explained through any theodicy. And then on the other hand, let's take something like the fine-tuning argument. It's an argument for the probability in terms of the what is the first cause, whether it was intelligent design, or whether it was random cause. And the reality is that it very well might be that the probability of the universe coming around is 1 in 10 was it 1 times 10 to the 40 or something, or even higher. But with an infinite amount of possibilities, it eventually would have to occur. Also, you could look to something like the necessity of being rather than God. You don't have to necessarily make God make it a divine mind. You could just say it actualized itself because it was necessarily possible in a modal sense. And I think that's kind of where I would take it. We can't really say that this universe is anything but possible because it's essentially the foundation for our logic and our reasoning as a whole. Existence is indubitable. So when I look towards the plethora of positions for and against God, it seems to me that there can never be where we look for these evidentiary claims goes beyond the scope of our investigative powers, either intellectually, as in we are trying to reason things which go beyond our faculties because they're perfect and we're not perfect, or contingently, they are necessary and we live in a contingent universe. So on both of those grounds, ontologically, it seems that we cannot gain evidence for or against the existence of a creator who's omnibenevolent, omniscient, and omnipresent. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't have a belief state about it. It just means that probabilistically, those belief states are going to be based off, for example, your presuppositional states, your hypothesis, which are going to be ungrounded. They're not going to have any foundation in reality themselves. So I don't know, unless you've got maybe you've got an argument I haven't heard. So maybe present your position, and I'll see if I have my mind blown.
Sure. So I mean, my argument is I haven't even thought about the counter evidence against God. My belief about God being unlikely is purely based on the complexity of the claim. I can run through a list of various attributes that are considered definitional for the Christian God. I went on Wikipedia real quick. I can drop it.
Yeah, go for it.
There's let me go up in the Wikipedia so I can read what these mean if we have any questions. There's aseity, eternity, goodness, graciousness, holiness, immanence, immutability. The main ones of omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, and omnibenevolence, immutability, incomprehensibility, impeccability, incorporeality. Various other attributes that are considered if the God didn't have this attribute, it wouldn't be the Christian God. These things are just kind of foundational to what we consider to be specifically the Christian God. There are plenty of conceptions of gods that don't have these attributes, but
kind of Anthony Flew, isn't it? Where he says, what is it? The God dies the death of 1,000 qualifications.
Yeah, basically, right? So it's all of these claims contribute to assess the prior probability of this. It's 1 divided by 2 to the power of the number of independent claims that make up the definition. So it's if you look at that, it's I have a list of 28 claims here, 28 things that are considered to be integral to the conception of the Christian God. So it's 1 divided by 2 to the power of 28. And that's a big number. That's 200 million. So it's 1 over 200 million is the probability based on the prior probability. We could take into account evidence, but you've said that there is no way to accrue any sort of evidence for or against the Christian God. So
yeah, I would say that.
So I'm curious, what's your argument against the prior probability assessment?
Well, I mean, in terms of the coalescence of those. I mean, they're essentially arguing the likelihood of the coalescence of all of these would be faculties. Do you think that'll be? I don't know if that would be the right word to use. Characteristics would be highly improbable to allow for the existence of a Christian God. I think that usually, they, in terms of the evidentiary claims given for God, which again I do dismiss in terms of proven God. The necessity of those characteristics are usually, based off what would be what would be likely to produce a God which could be said to exist. I don't necessarily see how I don't know if this is just me, but let's say I was to say the likelihood of God being A, B, C, D, E, F. God could be God being any of these characteristics. One, I don't necessarily think that we understand the characteristics themselves. So it kind of becomes difficult in many ways, because I think that it depends on the Christian God we're defining, right? So there's so many Christian interpretations of God and our relationship with God that these become real messy real quick. Let's take the the omnipotence of God. What's the likelihood of God being both omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent, right? I don't see how, for example, the addition of more predicates would reduce the likelihood of the existence of a God if he's non-contingent. If you follow,
Okay, so let me ask you this: if God was not considered to be necessary, would your opinion on that change?
If he was not considered to be necessary, yeah, probably.
So if God is not necessary, if God is, contingent or something, then you would say that, okay, when we add more claims to a proposition, when the proposition becomes more complex, there are more independent kind of atomic claims that make up the composite proposition. You're saying, like, the more claims there are, the less likely we're getting.
Well, essentially, because God would move from what would be considered absolutely simple to a complex attributation of various various attributes. So it'd be like saying, like, well, you know, God is rather than God is X, which is essentially usually the Christian claim, like God is absolutely perfectly simple, rather than anything. Like, he's not actually an amalgamation of various attributes. He is a single being, which is necessary and non-contingent. So if he was an amalgamation of various contingent attributes, then the existence of those attributes and then the likelihood of the coalescence within a single being, yeah, I would probably say that it would make it more or less likely. Well, like less likely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now why do you believe that God being defined as necessary changes that?
So I'd say that God being defined as necessary, or like in the terms of him being absolutely simple. So I would say that the best explanation of God, the necessity of God's existence, is probably Thomas Aquinas. God is actually existence itself, and so because he can't be predicated by anything else, he has to be the creator. He has to be, for him to be all powerful, all creation must be caused from him. To be all loving, he essentially has to be the end. So he has to be the finality or the foundation of all form. I mean that in like a formal cause, and final cause. So you'd have to be able to contain, essentially, you'd have to be prior to any universal from which we have knowledge of. So he can't be a form. He can't be, he can't be an end as we know it, and he can't be, any contingent power within the world, because that would limit his power in terms of creation. So the necessity and the simplicity of God, I really think, is kind of boiled into the concept.
Right. So sure. So then my question is, why do you believe that changes the assessment of the prior probability, so that it doesn't matter how many claims are bundled up in that definition?
Because there isn't it's not that there is many claims bundled up in the definition. It's like the definition is of absolute simplicity. There aren't attributes which are attributable to God in terms of forms. It's not that, like, when we say that he's omnibenevolent, omniscient, and so on, like, you could really sum them all up with just calling him God. He's like the reason when we're talking about these attributes and these connections within God, what we are, and I would say what we're doing, is talking allegorically in terms of human capacities and contingent capacities, to how we can understand what is the glory of God, right? So it's not that God, when we talk about power and we attribute that to God, we have no idea what that looks like to God, like what all powerful actually is. It's incoherent to us. What we're saying is something that is capable of doing, which is why we tend to run into paradoxes a lot, actually. Is he lifting really heavy rocks or not? I don't know. We'll reason those out to say, like, oh, well, God is, confined by logic, fair enough, but then, there's, like, physical claims that seem to breach our, like, sort of nomological rules. And we have to attribute those physical claims, like, the capacity to breach our ordinary understanding of the world, like, so, the ability to perform miracles or something like that, debatable, but, maybe to God. And so when we start talking about God in this respect, I think that we're just talking about something that we don't have knowledge of, we don't understand, and really we're positing the existence of something which we don't know through attributable qualities, but through relationship to contingent existence. I know him through the causes from which I have reasoned from, which is pretty much what what Aquinas argues, right? Like, we reason to God from the effect. just as we reason to any universals from the effect. By the way, I'm not an Aristotelian metaphysically necessarily. I'm just arguing, I think, for the sake of it, is the way in which we gain knowledge of God wouldn't be through knowing God and the concept of God in some sort of ontological argument, which I think is trash, but rather we know God through the contingent means of our investigation within this world, which means we don't know God at all. We just know our relationship with God. So saying that God is X or God is Y, I would say would be fundamentally incoherent to the nature of God. God is absolutely simple, so saying that he is or is not something else is nonsensical. He is only himself. He partakes in his own existence, and that's it. I mean, saying he is even like a wrong thing to do.
It's a very, very complex argument you've just given, but one of the things that I got from that is it sounds like you're saying that claims about God, such as, the claim that the Christian God exists, isn't really a claim that like a being with all these properties exists, but rather like we presuppose that there's something that is God, and then we're making observations about the nature of that thing that we presuppose exists. And so when we say the Christian God exists, what we mean is God has these kind of quote unquote Christian properties. Is that right?
Well, it's more like God has done. God is the creator and sustainer of all things. To be the creator and sustainer of all things, God would require X properties, or God would require the capacity to do X, through genera, or through generation. So it would be more of like we would be looking at how God created reality rather than what God is. So it would be defining a relationship with God, which is essentially the scholastic separation between God and the Godhead. God being our relationship and our belief in some sort of our relationship with God, which would be defined as like, in a Christian sense, this all-loving fatherly figure who is, creating the world in such a way as to maximize the best of all possible worlds. Whilst the actual God himself, like what we are talking about, even the attribution of the name seems to be quite wrong. I mean, like to be entirely honest with you, like even when we use the word God, I mean in the Bible, when they call him Yahweh, like in in the Hebrew, that simply means to be. So it's it really, there isn't anything like characteristically attributable to God that I would say was a rational claim. Like you could say like, oh, God is X. It's like no, it's not. Like it's unknowable. It's transcendent. It's transcendent.
So I mean, sure, but at the same time, people are claiming that a thing exists, and when you ask them what the thing is, they give you various attributes, and they say if it didn't have this attribute, it wouldn't be the thing that I'm claiming exists, and I'm interested in determining whether or not that thing exists. So,
well, I understand that. Which is why I said, like, I mean, I basically did say I think the question's pointless. But I guess what I would say is that we could determine whether our relationship with the thing is more or less likely to be that which is described in Christian scripture.
That would, when you say like assess the relationship that we have with a thing, presupposes the existence of a thing. So I wouldn't do that.
No, but I mean, like, so for example, like, for God to be the Christian God, I think that the way that if I was maybe you in this scenario, I would probably argue that what defines the Christian God is not simply the existence of this necessary simple being, because, well, that makes life really easy for me, but rather our relationship with that necessary non-contingent being, which makes life really hard for me, because now I need to explain relationship with Christians as such to be the Christians' God. Now, I think that I guess my response to that would be that Christians, in the enlightened sense, are allegorical. They recognize that actually what they are talking about in relationship to God is actually through analogy, and it's their relationship with the infinites of their own experience of ethics, of their own experience of being, and all of which would be necessarily dependent upon this simple first cause. And that's how I would probably wiggle out of that. Now, you could probably, actually, I'll let you push back any way you want, rather than just, just argue with me yourself for the next hour.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm still very unconvinced that there's some difference between the existence of God and any other claim that would mean that we can't make any judgments about the probability of that claim.
You mean like another unfalsifiable, like there's a gardener who's I don't know if you know the parable of the gardener.
I don't.
Oh, well, like Anthony Flew, like who I said, God dies the death of 1,000. He basically, it's a very similar argument. He basically gives this parable, and he says he was a very prominent atheist philosopher, and he said, two men walk into the woods, right, and they come across a clearing, and this clearing is like a garden. It's really like all the plants look well cared for, ordered. If anything, you could say it appeared designed. Two people, when they approach this, they go, one says a gardener must be here. There must be a gardener who is keeping this area to look like this. And another says, nah, it's just natural. It just happened. It's happenstance. Like eventually, some areas of the woods would eventually look like this. And so what they decide to do is test it. So they wait for the gardener. Gardener doesn't show up. Man hypothesizes that the gardener is actually invisible. And so the gardener's actually invisible. And so they can't see him. So then they set traps. And then he says, well, no, the gardener's intangible. Like, you can't touch him. Like, he can move through things if he wants to. And he goes, okay. And then, the more and more they try to, prove the existence of this gardener, the more qualities and attributes the gardener obtains. It becomes like, essentially the same as the Christian God. And then what Anthony Flew really says is that God dies the death of 1,000 cuts in this. It does, like, the existence or non-existence of the gardener now makes no relevance to whether the garden is or is not the way it is, because it doesn't add any explanatory power, so it's pointless to talk about. Now, he doesn't go so far to say that it means that the gardener doesn't exist, because it is unfalsifiable. And if it's unfalsifiable, then we have no evidence to believe or not to believe it in any other way. So that's basically where I exist. I think that, yeah, you could say that there was this like fucking demon gremlin thing that was like with all of these different qualities. Now, I would probably say, unlike Flew in this respect, the attribution, as you've said, of these qualities to a being probably increases or decreases the likelihood of that being's existence. Why the hell would I believe in an actual gardener who's like intangible, invisible, and so on? It seems to me that it could be explained in a simpler, in a simpler argument, which would give us greater explanatory power or greater knowledge, and so would be more acceptable. Natural processes of the world or something like that. But when you make the cause something from which is necessary and simple, like absolutely simple, so it's non-contingent, and then you also make it the ontologically separate from our experience of reality, and instead something more like more essentially like transcendently causal, like it is the. I don't actually not transcendently causal. Maybe transcendently causal, but like transcendently causal, then it becomes a separate question. We start asking questions from which there are no, greater likelihood of answers for. So, like, why is there existence over non-existence? There isn't really an answer for that. It's kind of a pointless question, isn't it? Really, I mean, like, we're not gonna find an answer for it. There's nowhere we can look for evidence for, and logically, all we know is that existence seems to be necessary, or at least it's necessary right now, and must be necessary in some respects for it to be possible. It's necessarily possible, right, in a modal sense. So, like, that's about as far as we get in terms of why it's the case, like sufficient reasons. We're not going to find one, and we're not going to find the necessary reasons either, because we're essentially looking within existence for the cause of itself, when we need to look prior. Do you see why I would say that maybe there is no reason to think more or less of for or against the existence of a being which is necessary and simple like this? Or
So, what do you mean by like absolutely simple?
Partakes only in itself. I would say that its essence would be existence. Yeah.
I have no idea. Yeah, I don't know what any of that means. Partakes only of itself. What does that mean?
So I'm using quite a Platonic word there. So that would be saying like. So I would say that it would be irreducible to any other causes. It can't be explained through the combination of other attributes. I would say that it is and only is itself. I would say that the more than that, it's it can't be something like hylomorphic in the sense that it can't be constructed of like multiple parts. It And then I mean that's kind of what I mean, like simple as in like a single unit of its own.
Okay. Like elementary.
Like elementary, like sui generis as well, like it's of its own genus.
Okay, necessary, simple. I do not see how that connects in any way to like finding evidence about something.
Right. Well, like so. Okay, so where would you say that we would gain evidence from?
Just by like the prior probability. Like we just look at how many alternative hypotheses there are with the same level of specificity. So you just look at like how many independent claims there are in like that compose the composite claim that the Christian God exists. And for each one of those, it can be either true or false. So you do 2 to the power of that. That's the number of permutations or combinations of those truth values. And we say that that is sort of a first approximation upper bound on the probability of this thing existing. I mean, this is just how prior probability is calculated mostly.
So, like, I mean, like, so, like, the probability, like, so, I mean, when we talk about something existing or non-existent, I'd say the probability isn't just based off, let's say, it would be based off, like, either the rational, like, so if we're looking at, like, so, for example, the likelihood or non-likelihood of the existence of any of the attributable belief states that would have to have, right? Their beliefs about something, aren't they? Like there would either be rational, like there would be a priori, essentially analytic beliefs, or there would be like a posteriori, or synthetic beliefs, or both, a priori synthetic. So when we look at, let's say, let's say the argument for the existence of the Christian God is I don't know, man. Like, so I mean, one, it would be dependent on the argument you gave for the existence of God, which I think is a
sorry. It depends the probability, the prior probability that you assign to the proposition that the Christian God exists is dependent on how somebody justifies the existence of God, how somebody explains why they think that God exists.
Sorry, could you say that again? I couldn't catch that.
I'm just clarifying if I understand what you just said. So it sounded to me like you're saying that like the assessment of the prior probability of a proposition is dependent on some argument made for the proposition.
No, well, I mean, what I was saying is that in terms of the proposition itself, like the proposition is constructed, like say, by premises which are themselves, essentially contingent upon definitions and the likelihood of those definitions actually being, the case.
I don't understand what you mean by that. It was like the proposition is composed of premises. Do you mean the argument is?
The argument is composed of premises. Yeah, sorry. So I'm
Okay,
thinking,
but there is no argument in question here. We just have a claim. We just have a conclusion
now.
So,
all right. So you're just saying you're just actually asking rather than saying whether I can come to an evidentiary claim of the existence or non-existence of God. What is the necessary the probability of even accepting the hypothesis of the existence?
No, it's okay. So it's like, let's see. So let's just do it with a dice. Okay, so you've got a d20, right? And if you make the claim, so that the proposition in question is when I roll this dice, it will land on a 6, right? So the probability of this occurring is 1. The prior probability of this occurring is 1 divided by the number of equally specific alternative hypotheses, like plus 1 for the actual claim that's being made. So this would be. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just listening.
Okay. So that would be 1 divided by, in this case, 20. There are 20 possibilities. So the prior probability is 1 divided by 20. Now, not all dice 20s are fair, right? So this would be, I don't have any information about how this dice is weighted. So I just look at how many things could possibly happen, and that's my starting point for the assessment of the probabilities. Then you roll the dice a whole bunch of times, and you figure out, it's actually weighted on the 6. The number 6, right? So it's like when you roll the dice, you take into account every time you roll the dice and you come up with a number. You start asking, well, what is the probability of this hypothesis being true? What is the probability of observing this string of results which are weighted so heavily in favor of the number 6? If it is true that that it's more like that this dice is weighted towards the 6 versus it being fair, let's say, and over time you would kind of improve the you would get closer to a belief about whether or not it's weighted. So first you assign a prior probability, and then over time using Bayes' theorem you adjust that prior probability using the evidence that you acquire, right?
Yeah, I got that. Yeah.
So what you've said is that the Christian God cannot be you cannot accrue evidence for or against the Christian God, which would mean that whatever our prior probability is, that is the probability of that proposition.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So now, if we look at what is the prior probability of the Christian God exists, well, the Christian God exists is actually a conjunction of a number of claims, right? As you say, it is there is something that meets each of these attributes, and then we say, and furthermore, there's one being that has all of them, or something, right? And so what we've got is roughly 29 atomic propositions that make up this proposition, right? And it can go even further. It's unclear where exactly we have the abstraction level here for how far do we decompose these propositions. Is it actually only 29, or does one of those 29 break up into another 50 more simple propositions, and so on?
Same for the predicates of the proposition, the more predicates, the greater the lower the probability.
The complexity, the lower the probability. Yeah, and so what we're doing is establishing an upper bound on this prior probability. It's at least this small, right? It's higher than this.
I guess my argument against that was that these attributable predicates are not actually attributable to the ontology of a god. So whether we're talking about the existence of a god, we're not actually capable of predicating an attribute to God. We are, if we do so, we've already defined him contingently. Like this is the issue with an absolute.
Right.
Like if it is absolute, then it's non-contingent, and me giving it a quality would be making it determinate and not itself anymore. So I can't say it is X, I can't say it is Y, because I've already attributed essentially something to it. So if we talk about, let's say, what is the Christian God, like when we talk about these predicates, what we are really talking about is, and I think this is more of the scholastic view, at least like some of the scholastics actually, is what we're actually talking about is our relationship with that God. Not really. It's more of like
I can't grant this for the sake of the argument, right? Because you're presupposing that there is, right?
Yeah, no, I know. I'm not going to say that I'm not certainly not, because I'm not going to presuppose it, because I am agnostic on the existence of this God. But it's more of the fact that we aren't giving a definition of God. Like God is actually indefined. What we are defining is something. It is our relationship with God. Now, or with the relationship of a proposed or hypothesized simple being. If that makes it a little bit easier. So rather than having to grant it, you could say like, okay, if God exists, our relationship with God, or the Christian relationship with God, explains God through these predicates, although they would also acknowledge that those predicates are not of God, but of our understanding or our capacity to understand the powers of God. They are allegorical to the power of God. Or to the
so you're saying that these definitions that we can come up with these attributes aren't actually the definition of God, and in fact you're saying there is no definition of God, right?
Yeah, none of these are predicable to God.
Okay. So then basically this is saying like, okay, well,
pointless.
The Christian God, when we say whether or not the Christian God exists, the statement is meaningless. When we say the Christian God, just the term the Christian God is meaningless. There is no definition for it.
Well, this is the thing, right? So this was kind of like where like Anthony flew. Like he's very. I think the point of him saying it's not meaningless, it's pointless, was very deliberate. If we were to say it's meaningless, then then we would have to define like what we mean by meaningless. Like, and then like
something without a definition, I would say.
Would you? I would say like because I can talk about something like, for example, I can talk about an infinite and it have meaning. I can just say I don't understand the depth and complexity of that meaning, and I think that is essentially what they would say.
So you seem to have a Platonic view of like ideas here. You're saying that there exists a concept of infinity that is outside of your mind, and what you mean when you say infinity isn't necessarily the quote unquote meaning of infinity. You might not know what infinity is, right?
I would probably say I'm a realist in terms of universals. I don't think I would go so far to say I'm like an exaggerated or a Platonic realist. I would probably go so far as to say that universals exist, at least in the sense that I'd say that like I mean this is explainable either in like Platonic, Aristotelian, or even conceptualist terms. Like we don't like the only thing that this wouldn't make sense in really is probably like a nominalist position. If we reject the reality of a universal, then what we are saying is that then that there is a particular God from which is non-allegorical to anything, that really like, well, even then I think that like this is the issue ontologically. If we take, let's say, the Aquinian point that we're reasoning from effect to cause, and cause is this being that is being posited, and it is undefined or undefinable.
Well, no, the thing is that does have a definition, where the definition there is that which caused what we observe.
Yeah, but I don't think that it's like I don't think that necessarily defines the being in question, does it? Like I don't think that like
No, it does exactly, because the point of a definition is to explain what it is we mean when we use the word.
I don't think we're defining a thing. We're defining the causal relationship to the thing and ourselves, or the relationship of reality to that thing. So it would be like it's like I don't know. I don't think I get the definition of a rock by saying that thing that got wet by the ocean, or like was you know what I mean? Like defining, you do not define something by what it's not or its relationship to what it's not. Although we do gain perhaps like maybe we gain, if anything, knowledge of the thing
is,
that
like, right,
relating
when you say like you know, we're talking about what God isn't, it's like, well, what do you mean by God though, right?
Well, that's I think I've already said it, like this simple, necessary being.
Okay, so that's the definition, right? That's what we mean by a definition. It's what you mean by a word. That's all definition means.
Yeah, but I mean, like, in terms of the ontological foundation for the definition, isn't it? Like, so it's like, look, if I say that something is simple, like infinite and simple and non-contingent, right? That tells you absolutely fucking nothing, though, does it? Like, it just tells you that it is something from which you can't ontologically grasp. Which is kind of like, this is the frustration.
There are well-defined meanings for those words that you just used, for like necessary and, you know, presumably for absolutely simple, and that does tell me something.
So like where, what we need to ask is where the definitions come from. This is where we're going to get into the problem of universals, right? Where do the definitions come from? Do they come from our interaction with contingent particulars? And if they do, then our understanding of the definition of God would be, once again, dependent upon our relationship with our experiential with particulars. Now, if you say like, okay, well, wait a minute, what they are is I don't know, like purely analytic. You know, like they're not actually defined by like, this would be like a Platonic conception. They're not defined by a relationship with a particular. They're actually defined by the absence of a relationship with the particular. And do you see what I'm saying? So if I was saying like, all right, well, what this necessary being actually is exactly not what the definition of these words would be in the form in which we know them. Do you know what I mean? Because in knowing them, we've given them contingency, and it is a necessary being. This is why people ended up going, God is like, you can't speak of God. Like, we can only talk about what God isn't, or we can allegorically speak of our relationship with God. Well, you know, God is this. Our relationship is with this creator and sustainer of all things, or whatever, which is absolutely simple. Well, what does that look like? It's existence itself, right? What is existence itself? It's an infinite, it's undefined. Because to define something is to add an aspect of nothingness, essentially, you know, to add privation. And this is why, like, it's so complex in this respect, because to give meaning to something is to differentiate it from something else. So I'd have to be able to go, it is, like, not only is it, like, it is X and not Y, but I can't do that to God because I can't put a predicate of him because he's simple. So it's kind of like, it's pointless. It's fucking pointless. I don't know what to tell you, man.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying, like, part of the definition of God is that God cannot be in a definition, essentially. Like, you know, there's an entailment there. It's like part of the definition of God is that God is absolutely simple, and if something is absolutely simple, then it cannot be defined.
It's kind of like what we'd call, like, I don't know if you've, like, so there's a guy called, like, Eckhart, and he talks about God and the Godhead, right? So the origin of God, as in our concept of God, would be the Godhead, which is really just a stand-in signification as something that is distinct from the predicates from which we apply to God, which is the cause. Because if we define, let's say we define God as the first cause, or we, attribute first causes to God in this necessary simple creature, or necessary even creature as a fucking big predicate, then is by a predicate in anything, we've already changed the nature of God. In changing the nature of God, it's no longer God.
See, I don't understand this. Like when all a definition is, right, is just saying like, here's what I mean when I say this word. So if you're saying that you cannot make a definition for God, then you are saying, right, that any statement about God, just the Christian God or God with that kind of like context is just a meaningless statement. It's like there's no meaning behind it, right?
Well, I guess this is where I would disagree. I'd say that you can talk about, I think like by talking about God, you are essentially, like if you were to talk about God in, like when we talk about God allegorically, it's like I can talk about something, like if I was talking about something like infinite, and I talk about it allegorically, it's more of a communication of my relationship with that infinite. It's not to say that it's meaningless. It's to say that I can't comprehend the meaning that is the ontological foundation in which it relates. So, like, I wouldn't say that a definition, for example,
the thing is, right, if you were talking about infinity and you don't have an understanding, a full, quote unquote, full understanding of infinity, then when you say infinity, you just mean something different than a person would mean if they did understand the full meaning of infinity, had a full concept of infinity.
This is the thing. Do you think anyone understands infinity?
Possibly. There's a difference between like understanding something in the sense of like defining what it is and being able to determine exactly when something is or is not infinite versus like being able to keep it all in your head at once. Like by that definition, we don't understand like anything. We don't understand apples because you would have to like hold every single quark in your head at the same time.
It's the same thing with God when he gets called the greatest conceivable being. But then the conception, the greatest conceivable being would be greater conceived by itself. So, definably, we don't have knowledge of that conception. We have knowledge of our conception of the greatest conceivable being, just as we have knowledge of our conception of infinity and not infinity itself. It would be like the distinction, essentially. It's like the definition. It's like when Aristotle or Aquinas says, everything begins in the intellect. Before it exists in being, essentially, what he's really saying is that epistemologically, our simple notion is the fact versus the reasoned fact. I think he calls it is undeveloped and is a stand-in for the thing itself. The thing itself, the reasoned universal conception, has a one-to-one correspondence with reality. So that definition is the thing, and they can be replaced at any given time. When I say that word after it is a reasoned universal, I am directly corresponding that signification and that conceptual framework with a reality which is indemonstrable, which exists in and of itself. Now, this is the thing. I think we could probably have, the former, the universal, like the infinite understanding of the infinite, or our understanding of the greatest conceivable being. But I don't think that we can have the ontological nature of God. We can't actually reason out syllogistically or dialectically to the nature of God. So we never actually obtain a correspondence with God to the point in which when we speak God's name, we actually speak something other than our understanding of God. It's meaningful because it's communicable. It translates an idea from which another individual can also conceive of and understand, but it's not demonstrable of reality. So, in terms of the proofs of God, the point of talking about God and His attributes it's meaningful, but it's pointless.
I just don't understand. Like, okay, so you're saying that's meaningful in the sense that like we can say the word God in various sentences, and people like have some ideas that get triggered when you say that. Like it's a
Like,
communication.
well, this is where they would say like, it's actually a communication of our notions of God and what we conceive of as the greatest conceivable being.
Right.
But we don't
See,
actually.
that's what I'm referring to when I say the Christian God, right? Is I'm talking about people's conception. Like this is what like when people say the Christian God, here's what they're referring to. Here's the claim that they're making. They're saying that something exists with these attributes, and that's what I'm talking about when I say the Christian God. Is that conception that people have of it, right? Like
Yeah, but I mean, like, if you talk about the conception of people, like, you know, like I completely agree that people's conception of God is absolutely false. Like, it's just not what God is in any way. Like, but I
what
think
do you
that's
mean by what God is? Like
so
you
they
just
did.
have a different like you just have a different
No,
definition of God then.
no. It's more of the fact. It's real. It's the realization that the signifier is a stand-in for something which is ontologically in undescribable. So it would be like it's like it'd be like trying to like I'm trying to say. It would be like for me to try and say like if you were to say like this is like why I think like you know when it says like I am or something like that, the idea of the pure simplicity of existence is in and of itself. It's something that it's like something that goes beyond our conceived notions. Like we can't conceive of the infinite of existence, right? Which is kind of like the whole point. But we can talk about existence in a way which is meaningful in relation to us and to other determinate objects. But when we talk about existence itself, it becomes nonsensical, or it becomes yeah, I would say it becomes pointless. Its meaning can be captured in communication, in allegory, in something which is, you know, transcendent, but it's only really giving an indication of the existence of something from which we do not understand but have experience of. That is what I would say that the Christians understand the Christian God to be, versus the like something like that this is actually like God is X, Y, and Z. Like God isn't actually like they aren't going like right. God has a beard. God is very tall. You know, like any kind of contingent properties of God. They define God in relation to universals from which they have allegorical experience. Like God has the power of all creation. Like God is the creator and sustainer. He's all powerful. God is you know, eternal and like eternal and all present, or eternal in every way. So he's omnipresent. God is essentially the completion of the universe and its beginning, and so is the final cause of reality. So he is all good. He is the measure of value. He's like the yardstick. That relationship to God is our relationship with the reality which we experience and the attributable causes of all of that reality to a single unified entity from which is infinite and indemonstrable. Like we simply cannot access it. It's ontologically separate. We can talk about it, hypothesize about it, allegorically share experiences about it in a meaningful, communicable way. But when we talk about it, we're not actually speaking of the thing and its predicates. Well, lack of predicates, actually. The thing and its definition. We are giving instead a description of our own experiences and our conceptions of divinity. We're talking more about ourselves and our growing understanding of ourselves and our relationship with whatever it may be, rather than the thing itself.
Okay, well, if people are just talking about like their relationships with their concepts of divinity or whatever, I can't really argue that that doesn't exist. People do have concepts of divinity, and there's like there would be a whole bunch of different concepts of God that would correspond to people's different relationships with divinity. But that's just not what anybody like. Maybe some people think this way, but like a large portion of Christians, I would say the vast majority of Christians, believe in a being, some thing, entity, conscious personhood that created everything and has these specific attributes, such that if some being didn't have these attributes, it would not be God. That's what a definition is. It's something that's like if it has these attributes, then it's right.
Disagree. I would say that there are some people's notions of God which I find fundamentally stupid.
Okay, so it sounds to me like you have like you put meaning in the word itself separate from whatever meaning anybody puts in it. Like there's some essence to the word God, and you're saying you can only assign that label to certain things. I don't understand this.
Well, it would be a single unified, infinite, irreducible.
That's the meaning that you assign that label to.
It wouldn't be me. It would be, I mean, an entire tradition. Look, like saying, like, can I give, like, when we talk about, this is why I said, like, when we talk about the Christian God, I said, like, at the start, I was like, which Christian God do you mean? Like depending on, like, if you're a fundamentalist, versus, let's say, someone who's talking about like the allegorical nature of God, which is separate, Scripture is not giving us anything but revelation, and that revelation exists to point us in the direction of God and not like tell us the nature of God and so on. Like it totally depends on the Christian like sect you're talking to and the Christian you're talking to. I mean, shit. Like what you would be predicable of God would be dependent upon that. But like what I'm saying is that in this conception, which is the one I'm willing to defend, which I think is really the only one that is defensible, it's the belief or disbelief of God is pure 50-50.
So. And your conception of God is what? What are what's the definition here?
So I'd just say like the greatest conceivable being, or like I'd say something like either the greatest conceivable being, or that which is necessary, absolutely necessary, absolute necessary, and it would have to be maybe like the first and last cause of, or like even just the creator, I think would probably suffice. The foundation, like the cause of creation.
Okay, so for yours, right? What you've got is two independent claims. So absolutely necessary and is the creator of everything. I'm quite certain that each of those propositions breaks down further, but we can just treat them at that level of abstraction. What we've got then is 2 divided by 2 to the power of 2, which is 1 divided by 4, which is 0.25. You've said that you can't accrue evidence for or against this thing, so we'd have to finish with a probability of 0.25, which I would not say is absolutely is almost certainly non-existent. So I would say that under this definition, without breaking things down any further, I'd agree. But I'd also say that this is not at all what I mean by the Christian God. It's not what like anybody means by the Christian God.
I mean, it kind of is. I mean, like I would go to say. I would say that the things that I've described as predicable are really stand-ins for the simple nature of God, which is why in the Bible he's called Yahweh, which means to be. He says to he says to Moses, my name is I am. Like, I mean, fuck, like that is you only think simpler than that.
Okay, but the thing is, like, this is clearly not the definition in use of God, because, like, people
it's because of the way that people are talking about God is in relationship to an allegorical relationship with this absolutely simple
They're not saying that it's just an absolutely simple, necessary creator
Oh,
of everything.
I mean, like, I think they are. Like, so for example, the Catholicism.
They also claim that he's absolutely powerful, which does not follow from being the creator of everything. Does not follow from being absolutely necessary. They also claim that he's omnibenevolent, which absolutely doesn't follow from anything else in this definition. They say that is infinite, immutable, eternal. None of these things follow from the definition you've given. So the definition in common parlance must be extended.
Well, one, I actually made a mistake there. It's I am that I am. Thanks, Sovereign Studies. That's what he says to Moses. But the thing is that and that's the burning bush as well. He doesn't even appear, like, he can't appear in his form. He just appears as something that's just like incomprehensible at the talking burning bush. But anyway, the thing is that the thing is that the attributable qualities to God are attributable to our relationship with God, which is essentially the alpha, the omega. Like, is usually what, like, I am the alpha, the omega. The beginning and the end. Like, that is what God is to Christians. He is right. It is the fundamental, intangible, simplistic existence which makes things be or not be. Right, and in that they say that he's omnipotent because everything is created, essentially causally connected to him. He's omniscient because. Even he's and this is all allegorical, by the way. He's omniscient because everything that does or does not exist would be produced by their deliberation or their action, and then the omnipresence. He is the foundation and existence of everything. It could not exist without him. He is causally foundational to all determinate being.
I mean, that doesn't mean that he exists everywhere, first of all, but
it would mean that it depends on what you take existence to be. I mean, that's essentially the existence of something as being, like, so for example, the existence of a cause within its
yeah, but that's not what anybody's saying, right? Like, omnipresence, like, almost everybody, any Christian you talk to, when you say, like, if you go up to, like, any Christian on the street and you ask them, okay, what does it mean that God is omnipresent? They're saying, God is everywhere. God is within my heart. God is within my skin. Like, this is what they mean. They don't mean, like, God is the cause. Like,
I don't know. Like, I think that they would say that God is intimately connected with the fundamental nature of reality. Like that, like I don't think that the necessary, like, and what an average individual thinks on the street. Like, look, like the average atheist's a fucking idiot. Like, I don't judge atheism by the average atheist.
But no. But if, like, the atheists were saying that there was making some particular claim, right, and we were asking about the atheist conception of that thing, then we wouldn't be looking at perspective philosophy's particular niche definition of it.
Look at one. Like, if we take the average atheist's, like, for example, claims for the non-existence of God, they have nothing to do with anything that you've just said about the possibility. Or was
We're not talking about an atheist definition of anything, so that's irrelevant.
Or the atheist rejection, right? Like, of a proposition. Like, a lot of the time, atheists come up with arguments related to, like, let's say the problem of evil is complex for atheists. Most atheists, and this is with Christians as well. I'm not holding a bias. So, like, Christians and, like, atheists in general. Like, the average everyday individual's relationship with religion is dogmatic and undefined. I think judging by the average everyday individual, and not, like, for example, I don't know, the entire intellectual tradition, which is foundational to the religions which they partake, which they choose not to investigate, is probably a little bit more fair. Like, I think that look, like, for example, the definition I gave is one which is connected to one of the most foundational thinkers in Christendom at all, like, ever, like, with Thomas Aquinas. I've mentioned, for example, the medieval problem of the universals and the scholastics and how they were approaching that. The entire time I've been referencing Christian debate, not some random niche, like, haha, I thought about this when I was in the bathroom, lol. Like, like, I've actually been talking about the concepts which have been debated within,
some academic. Of them, some of them, but you can't deny that God is also considered to be omnibenevolent. Like, that's a separate thing. That can't be derived from either of the things you just talked about.
Well, omnibenevolent, yes, it can. I mean, like Aristotle, Aquinas would relate this to the final cause. You know, like it essentially is the completion of everything, which is the measure of goodness, because good is essentially the attributable measurement of something actually completing its nature. And since God is the end of reality, is the final cause, then is essentially God is the measure from which all creation gives, like essentially is measured against.
Something fulfilling its nature. Is that what you said?
Yeah. So like that. This is like an Aquinian understanding of goodness. So like it would be like functional. So like
right. So literally everything is good then.
No, but you'd say that some things do or do not fulfill like a natural function. So like
what do you mean by a natural function? How could something not fulfill a natural function?
A seed which does not germinate has not fulfilled its function as being a seed.
How do you determine that the function of that seed is to germinate?
Yeah, but this is the problem of universals. Do I understand? Do I understand this is where like you get like the functional cause of man and so on. Like functions themselves are understood in relation to or understood in relation to, let's say, like processes which are complete or which explain the nature of a thing. Like the nature of a thing is to go through the process. What makes a seed its seed? It would be definable as the capacity to, germinate, have the potentiality to germinate, and progress on to a bush, a tree, and so on, right?
This is definitely a biologically controversial take right there, because like a lot of biologists would say if you have a malfunctioning seed, it's still a seed.
Yeah. Oh, so would like that. You would just say it's a bad seed. That's what.
I mean. Like, but why do you consider it to be bad? Is because it's like it goes against the nature of a seed. But what's the nature of a seed? Well, it's whatever a seed does. Well, this is a seed, and this seed is not germinating. So the nature of a seed can't be to germinate.
This is the thing. If you accept that as a particular, and you say that the evidence of the nature of a seed is defined by our relationship with a given particular, so the nature of this given particular is its nature, then you would say yes. If you were to say that it's in fact a universal in which we relate to, so what a seed is, it's actually a universal which relates various objects by a definable explanatory claim. Like, for example, there is a difference between a seed and a nut in relation to what they perform. Then you would say like these are all seeds. That is a pumpkin seed, that is a sunflower seed, and so on. Our understanding of these predicates is based on these universal attributes. What makes them particular is coincidental attributes, which are attributable to it being that seed, this seed, or accidental in the words of like Aristotle or Aquinas. Then we could say that a seed's ability to fulfill its function as a seed can be judged against a universal concept of what seeds are, the substance of seeds, what it means to be a seed, versus the actual individual nature of this seed, as in this seed.
But if you're saying that it's like the nature is what it means, if you're saying that the nature of a seed is what it means to be a seed, then you wouldn't call it a seed unless it met that nature.
Well, so like for example, we could define humans as being like bipedal. We could say that like bipedal, like I don't know, atypically like the members of the Homo sapiens species and so on, right, like that. But even then, these like characterizations of the species of the or genus, right, that they're actually universals built up of what. Now, this is the thing: do we come to these universals by abstraction? This is going to get like really messy, right? Because you've got like points of abstraction. Do we abstract qualities of these universals which are attributable to every single member of the species? If not, then we're probably going to find out no universals exist, and we're going to fall into nominalism, right? Because we're going to say like, well, actually, all of these qualities aren't attributable to all these things. Now, what we can say is that certain what I mean by a certain quality, this maybe like conceptualism, what I mean by a certain quality or a certain species is X, and so something is characteristically falls into that species if it meets these criteria, which is exactly what we do. Like, for example, we would say that animals or whatever are usually defined by like that capacity to facilitate certain functions, interbreed, produce offspring, which makes them members of the species. If an animal is born infertile, it's still a member of the species because it had the potentiality, even if it does not have the actuality, to perform that function. Now, that would be my take on universals. Yes, universals are real. They do actually give explanatory power of reality. When I say that is a lion and that is a tiger, it has relevance to the actual determinate nature of reality, rather than just saying that's a lion, that's a lion, that's a lion, that's a lion, or we're just giving names to a collection of particulars. So, I mean, like, shit, what's your stance on universals?
I mean, I'm not sure I have a stance on universals. I would say that most of these things I consider to be like concepts, constructs in our minds, and that like a universal is just this idea of basically an archetype or some kind of template that you take. Like it's just the idea of like the essence of a thing. It's the thing that matters to the definition of something. So there's like you would say that like something is a cat if it meets this this universal or something. If it has these qualities, these particular qualities, and there's some archetypal cat that just has exactly those qualities and nothing else, and like has those qualities perfectly, that's like the universal. And then you'd look at a particular cat and you'd say, well, it meets all those qualities. We don't care about the rest. It's a particular. Right? I don't know. I haven't thought about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it gets really messy. So for example, like a good example with a cat, like, but even let's say like a triangle is the perfect triangle, an isosceles or like a what are the other, shit, I can't remember the like it's triangle. It's like isosceles and like, oh shit, not right. Equilateral. Like what is the perfect triangle? Is it isosceles or equilateral? Like, so when we talk about, let's say, the definable characteristics of triangleness, the substance of triangles, these universal characteristics, are we just collecting what are let's say, notions which we actually just refer to reality? So nominalism would just say, like, look, like this is actually just a name, and what we mean by triangle is something that we point towards outside. So we're like, that. We actually mean that thing, and that thing, and it's a collection of particulars which we can have a knowledgeable experience of, right? Now, if you were to say that, well, that's like that would be one way of going about it. Then there's like realism. So then you've got, let's say, and you've got like exaggerated realism. These are like medieval as fuck, right? So you've got like exaggerated realism, and you've got was it indifferentism? So like exaggerated realism would be like, this triangle in my mind is actually separate and real. Plato, The World of Forms. Then you've got indifferentism, which would be like, the triangle in my mind is the same as all of the triangles outside of my mind, and indifferent in its quality of being a triangle. It is what it means fundamentally to be a triangle. Then you've got like conceptualism. There exists a triangle in my mind, but no triangle in nature. It is a universal concept which exists, but only in my mind. In nature, there is only particulars. All of these have that, positive and negative, and there's a whole fucking huge debate going on around that. Like, well, there was a massive debate about it for like 500 years or some shit. And I would probably fall on the side of like realism. I probably would say universals are real. I would say that our conceptions of those real universals are often poorly defined and need refined, and sometimes even just wrong Uh, like we just misconceive reality. Like it has been poorly tested, and we've just misconceived the nature of reality. But we can and do reason to universals which do actually exist. Like, and I would probably take what would be somewhat close to an indifferentist position on that. So it like actually corresponds to reality.
All right, cool. But let's. I feel like we're on quite a tangent here. We may not be, but I don't quite understand the connection.
I guess the point is that like when we're talking about like universals in this, right? It's like if we're to say that God is like when we talk about this like this this God like being like the end of everything, right? Like if I was to say that God is good, if I'm something like a nominalist, like William of Ockham or something, I will be like pointing towards God and going, that is good. You know? The concept in my brain not only doesn't relate to that, but is just it's not like I get this through faith, really. Faith and right reason. I don't really get this through I can't actually allegorically talk about God because he's in his own generous, right? He's a particular from which maybe I can get experience. I'm not sure. I can't actually. I'm maybe a bit iffy on me Ockham, but he's a nominalist or a terminalist in this. If I was to say that God, so that means God is a particular, and it's only through my experience directly to God that I would gain something like kind of knowledge of God, right? If I was like Plato, I would say that it would be the end of like a dialectic, right? So like my idea of God being goodness is just the same as God being like this fundamental dialectical end in perfection. In which case, I think that if you were to take that Platonic take, you would still like you'd probably come to you wouldn't define God by his relationship to us. You'd define like in the sense that we couldn't have an allegorical take of God by his relationship to us. If anything, that's only going to cloud us from the nature of God. What I'm saying is probably closest to Aquinas or Aristotle, and saying that when Christians do talk about God, and they talk about God's goodness, they talk about God being like, this perfect being, right? But he's perfect in himself, as in he is complete and immovable, so facilitates his function perfectly in a way that we would wish to emulate. Like all that nature itself, the whole of nature would wish to emulate and bring to the glory of God, which is essentially what Aquinas is. We all wish to. It's kind of like the prime mover. Like it is perfect, and we wish to be that because in being that, do we gain the greatest overall completion of nature itself? He is the completion of nature, in its simplicity, in its perfection, in its immovableness, right? But also, is the measure. Because in completion, in absolute completion, do we find like the incremental nature of how incomplete we are, like how contingently not good we are. Like there is a privation to our existence. We will never be God, and since we will never be God, the measure of not being God is in comparison to God. If you see what I'm saying.
I'm gonna be honest. I have no idea what you're talking about, but it's a bit too long of a path for me to follow.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, like, I mean, like, if it's any consolation, I think it's almost entirely pointless.
Yeah, but like, I wish I understood why you think that it's pointless, but I can't understand these. Insanely long monologues, but it's like
I mean, it's fine. I think that like it's pointless because like from what I've said before, like I don't think you can give any predicable, defined attributes to God and God themselves beyond our relationship with God. So it all comes down to a belief state, whether I choose to believe or not to believe. So in talking about whether you should or should not believe, it's pointless. There's no evidentiary claims to make.
Okay, so the thing is, right? I don't quite understand what exactly you're saying, but independently, there is, in fact, a conception of this being that exists that people call God, and they say that he has these particular attributes within Christianity. And, there's the various, omniscience, omnipotence, or in your case, if we're going to pare it down to your particular case, then I can, it's an absolutely necessary being that created everything and is omnibenevolent and incomprehensible, and probably a great number of other things if we were going to extend your definition to incorporate all the things that people say about it.
I think that's a misinterpretation. I think by extending the things in predicates of God, what you're really doing is you're predicating how I'm describing the being. I'm referencing allegorically notions to you rather than giving you a solid definition of God, or like he has the.
Maybe it would help for you to explain what you mean by allegorical.
Like comparable, like give some sort of allegory.
Yeah.
So that's I can get the definition. One second, allegory. A story or poem, a picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one, a symbol. So I would say it's symbolic. It's not descriptive.
Not descriptive.
So if I say I don't know, if I say something was allegorical of God's goodness or whatever, like God's goodness is so it's like the perfect nature of God is allegorical to, I don't know, the feelings of completion, in the sense that he's simple, and our understandings of completion and goodness are diminished, but maybe relatable notions to God. It would be like metaphorical. Do you see what I'm?
Okay. So when you say that God is absolutely necessary and is the creator of everything, you don't actually mean by those words what people mean when they say those words. You mean some evocative, expressionist sort of thing. Like I get the feeling, I get the vibe of something when you say those words. Is that the idea?
Like you're getting what would be a partial but absolutely inadequate notion. So it'd be like you're getting a vibe or like.
So it sounds like another part of your So it sounds like another part of your definition would be, and there's other stuff that's true about this that I don't understand. You're saying it's not these things that are true, and some other stuff.
I mean, actually, if you look into the theology of it, so for example, Aquinas would say that it would be wrong to say there are other things true because it is truth itself. So it's it is the measure of truth and goodness. So it exists because it's existence, right? Which is essentially if what is true is what it actually exists, and God is perfectly actual in this, which is the idea of him being perfectly simple. He's perfectly actual. He is, which is I am that I am, or to be, would mean that he is truth, perfect truth. So to say there are other things true is the mistake you're making.
Well, so the thing is you could say that something is truth itself and has also other predicates, right? So it's not a contradiction. I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, no, because you couldn't say that. It's like saying that something is. If you say something is truth in and of in itself, and say that there are other things true than truth itself. No, that doesn't make sense. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, so if you say that there's truth, so then we say what are the things that are true of truth? So I can just talk about the abstraction truth, the concept of truth, because truth is truth. So if I say okay, what are the things that are true of truth? Well, truth is a concept. Well, truth is something that a lot of people value. So, it's something that a lot of people value. Wouldn't
all of those things would be components of truth rather than it would be truth would be like they would all be describable as being true or not.
Yeah.
So it's like, it would be like truth is
Yeah.
what truth is. Like it'd be like saying like truth is what is. Like this is the whole kind of like it's like that which is perfectly actual. And so if you start describing actual things, you're going to start describing like individual parts of an infinite which are encompassed in this universal.
Okay. I mean, you can say things about truth. You can like predicate things of truth, right? And yes, they may be parts, they may be contained within the meaning of truth. That would be a pretty standard view of meaning, would be that it's like predicates are contained within the meaning of the object, right? Sure. That doesn't change anything. That's just like a truth about like meaning in general. I don't see how that's specific to the concept, the abstract concept of like truth or God or anything like that.
I guess like to say what truth is, what perfect truth is, would be like saying that would be to be able to give an utterance which contained absolutely every actual thing, and it would be that which is perfectly. It would have a one-to-one relationship with reality, absolutely. So there's nothing that you could add to that.
Oh, so you're saying that God is literally everything? It's God is truth?
It's an absolute universal, yeah.
Okay, so God is everything. We could just skip the rest of the parts of the definition and just say God is everything because that's...
So God is perfectly simple and but yeah, I mean universal. Like I mean, yeah.
I mean, those things don't imply that God is everything, but
I mean, I'm pretty sure I just said that God like was like the cause of everything. That everything was dependent upon God for creation and would be dependent upon God for creation and sustenance. That everything, and I mean, shit. I mean, I even said that everything was not only causally affected. I mean, like to give like the Aquinian sort of position on this, maybe I could have fleshed that out a little bit more. You actually used the word archetype before, which would pretty much sum up what creation is. It is matter doesn't exist in and of itself except from the action of God. The formal cause of everything, the notion of everything, exists in the mind of God. The creation of everything is the action made by God, and the function and purpose of everything is in relation to God's design, like what formal design, and essentially to its capacity to complete itself, which is in reference to the what is absolutely complete and unchanging. So yeah, like I don't know, maybe I didn't flesh that out a little bit more.
yeah.
But
okay, so if God is everything, okay, then this is a highly complex claim. To say that like God is everything, there is this thing that is everything, is to say that like, you know, it is this and not this, and is that not that. But actually, no, like just to say God is defined as everything, well, like everything exists, right? So I'm not going to argue, like, we know that everything exists.
It's defined as existence, which is exactly what I've said numerous times. Existence itself.
Okay, great. Okay, so if God is existence itself, then obviously existence exists. We're good. I agree with you on under that very odd definition of God.
Yeah. Great.
Okay. But it doesn't solve the proposition, because like the meaning that you're assigning to the Christian God is something that could also be said about numerous many other things that are never called the Christian God, or are called by many other names. They're called the you know, well, like for example the Islamic God, or you know, some complicated conjunctions of a whole bunch of different things. And the Christian God,
I think the Abrahamic gods, like it would be ridiculous to call them plural. They're talking about the same thing. The difference would be
there are different claims made about them.
Well, I mean, like the different claims made about them usually relate to our ethical obligations within reality and our relationships to the thing, not the thing itself. I never hear them actually argue over the predicates of what God is, like ever.
Yeah. Sure. I
So
mean, I mean, the thing is, right, is like my point is it's pretty clearly defining your way to success. I mean, you could just define God as like an apple,
apple,
and then you've got okay, God exists, apples exist.
well, no, I think that would be again like because you know there would be perishables, so you'd be like, oh, that apple doesn't get it. But anyway, then regardless, like it is somewhat defined. I agree. Like there is somewhat a definition, like
Yeah.
finding your way to success in that. But then it's whether this God, I mean, really, it's whether the God is like.
And also, if this was really like your conception of God from the start, I don't understand why you didn't just go with that from the beginning. God is everything. Obviously, everything exists, so God exists.
It's not. It's actually one. It's not that just God is everything. It's that like God. It's more of like what we would say was, because if we say that God, like, because if we just say that God is everything, it's like right, okay, so everything is fundamentally attributable to God, but then we have to say that God is separate from, in the sense that, like for example, is God my notion of everything, or is God that that's really what we're talking about? And I'm not a Christian. Just I used to be a Christian though. Just to answer that, but so it's not to say that like. So if I was to say like, you know, God is everything and everything, and you know, it's exactly what I said when I said God is existence. But the difference is that, and like one, how many facets we give. So if I say God is everything, and by everything I mean the combination of determinate characteristics from which is attributable to reality itself, or do I say that God is existence? They're very different. It's like one as well. Like you can also say that like. It depends on whether we consider everything to contain privation, because God, in this definition, couldn't contain privation. So, for example, God can't contain not being himself, whilst we can contain not being God. So, the act of generation the act of generation or creation would contain the act of not being God, but only in so much as we still exists in it as a cause. So, like, when I say God is existence, God gives existence, God is existence, is being, but that doesn't mean that I am God, or that, you know, like John down the street is God.
You're certainly not
all
of God. You would be part of God, because God is everything.
That's it. Like, it'd be like part of God, part of a greater whole, which we are trying to explain our relationship to. And that's where
are you or are you not saying that God is everything? Like in the sense of like all of reality, the entire universe, God is materially the universe, and like everything that is.
I mean, like when we start saying materially, I think that's where I'd say that God would be existence itself. So like more than what is materially there. So yeah.
Well, is God at least what is materially there? Is God like is everything that we observe part of God?
You'd have to be more, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so God is like okay. Well, all those things. Oh, right. So he's more than that. So he doesn't necessarily exist, even if reality exists. Okay. So it's more like everything is within God.
It's more like your definition of what can and cannot exist doesn't necessarily encompass the existence of that which is absolute. It's more of an acknowledgement of our own inadequacies rather than God's.
Sorry? Repeat that?
So like it's more of an inadequacy. It's more of like a point out the inadequacies of given definitions to existence itself. So if I say existence is purely material, right, and say like one, I'm an existentialist, so I don't think it's a fucking solid claim anyway. But like the if I was to say that existence is purely material, and God is more than it would have to be more than existence, more than material. Then like if we've got like it'd be like saying like, oh well, the universe is just material and God is just like he is just matter in motion. Like I don't think.
I mean, you'd be saying that God is more than just matter in motion. I believe, if I was following you.
Yeah, that's what I'll be saying, that God is the cause of matter in motion. That's the difference. That's
the cause. Okay, well now we're back to the start. Okay, so it's not that God is everything. God caused everything.
All of it. He caused it. He is it. It's everything.
Oh, so God is everything over there.
So yeah, so like existence itself. I mean, fuck, I've said that like 20 times.
Okay, well, Great. Okay. Everything exists, right? Tautologically. I don't know why you didn't just start with that. Like,
Yeah, well, I mean, I did actually start with that. I think I said
no,
about
you didn't. You should have
I,
just said that like a billion
I
times until I got it into my head. Like, be like,
said
but
I am.
Azgerod, mate, everything exists. Come on. Everything exists. Obviously, and God is just everything.
It's not that.
So,
It, it's more
and
about.
also, if you
It's
think
more
God is
about.
everything, and obviously God exists, then why do you only assign 0.5 probability to God? You should assign 100% probability to God because obviously everything exists.
Said that. So what I said was that God would be in this. That I am existence itself is absolutely necessary being. Would be that he'd be the greatest conceivable being, and the greatest conceivable being. I mean, like shit. Like it's whether like if we accept the ontological argument, which is like the greatest conceivable being must exist, then yeah, like fuck, like then yeah, God absolutely must exist. The point is that whether the conception of what means what God is in terms of the like what is um in terms of these infinites is allegorically connected to this relationship we have to God. Which is why I said, if you're going to argue with me on this, don't talk about the existence or non-existence of this. I said it makes things too easy for me. You should instead talk to me about the relationship Christians have to God and whether it is rational or not, or whether it makes sense.
That's just not remotely what I'm talking about, right? Like the point is whether or not the thing which people mean when they say God, in particular what Christians mean when they say God, the question is, does that thing that they're referring to exist? Now, I don't think that what Christians refer to as God exists, but I do think that what you refer to as God exists, because what you refer to as God is just everything.
It's so weird because where I got this like notion of God was Christianity. I don't know. I don't know.
Being part of Christianity doesn't mean that you were all of Christianity, right?
Oh, I mean, shit. I mean, like,
or even most.
I mean, like, I mean, the fact that the way I got this was just hundreds of years of debate. That you know was at the the in terms of scholasticism and like one of the largest Christian thinkers to ever live, and both physically and mentally. Am I right? Like Thomas Aquinas. He was a big guy. But anyway, the thing is that like I don't know why like you would say that this is niche. Like I don't see
sure.
what.
Okay, look, maybe it's not niche. It's just that I've like when I talk to Christians most of the time, my understanding of Christianity is not that it's this tautological thing. Usually, it's a particular thing that could or could not exist. Sometimes they sneak a predicate of is necessary in there, but usually it's like this specific being that it has thoughts of some kind and is omnipotent and is able to do things and is sort of contained within the universe, or maybe it exists outside of it or something. But it's not usually just defined as like everything, because like but sure.
What are the Christians defining into one saying that they slip a predicate of necessary in misses the point of what necessary means, which is like non-predicable. To the point of the point of what they're saying in terms of these qualities is to give explanation to what would be this infinite, and there isn't a Christian out there that says, "Oh, God is powerful, God is intelligent, or knows a lot." No, they say all-knowing, omnibenevolent, all-powerful. So no, all the Christians that define God in this way, omnibenevolent, omniscient, omnipotent, creator and sustainer of all things, are referring to the same concept. Some refer badly to like trying to say that God and give like predicable qualities to that, like what that means, what that actually is. That would be a mistake. But what they are actually referring to is our relationship with creation and the creator. They believe in a creator, and they would say that like if a creator exists, or they say a creator does exist, I believe a creator exists, and so these acts of creation are explainable allegorically like this. It gives us an understanding of our relationship to this notion.
Okay, so let me ask you, why are you an agnostic if you believe that God is everything? do you think that there is only a 0.5 probability of everything existing?
It's more of whether God actually, it's more of whether this first cause, whether there is a first cause.
Well, even if there wasn't, it sounds like you're defining God as being everything.
Or even a cause which is, or even like something, or one, I would say that the conception goes beyond human faculty, but more than that, it would be, it goes beyond what is like actually knowable. Like you could say that it's like a priori, but I mean, like if I say like, all right, if I say like it is just being, like I am, like it just am, then I could just attribute that to I could just say like this just exists. It's just coincidence, and not only is it coincidence, it exists in a certain way that is not explainable by, let's say, or not allegorically explainable through notions of omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence. Actually, I don't like. So, for example, I think that the problem of evil. I don't, but let's say I was to say that the problem of evil succeeds. I think that, or I think that it gives greater credence or cognitive success or something along the lines to a. At least it makes me feel in such a way that I hypothesize, I believe in such a way, an act of choice in one way or the other, that God would not necessarily have to be understood as all-loving. Now, that doesn't mean that he isn't, or that I've given any evidence against it. It just means I have a belief state that this first cause, or this like fundamental like necessary being, would not have to be allegorically explainable in this way. So, like, yeah, that's why I'm an agnostic, because I think that an individual can be rational about these things. Like if an individual says, actually, the problem of evil is just too much for me. I just can't believe in the Christian God. Right, fair enough.
Like they would be an idiot by your definition of God. You're like, they're saying like, oh, like there's evil in the world, so therefore everything doesn't exist. Like they're treating with a different definition of God than you are. That doesn't apply to your definition of God.
Well, not everything. So like this is the thing. This is the whole reason that I brought up the whole Godhead distinction. So, like, when we are talking about God, when they say, like, oh, he's omnibenevolent, and they relate that to, they are reasoning from effect to cause, and they're saying, look, this is explainable through an act of, like, all-lovingness, right, of caring and completion and goodness, right? I don't think that an atheist would necessarily have to attribute that as being having the greatest overall explanatory power for this being. Whether they could deny the being, they're just like, right, well, I think that your allegory shit.
Okay, but we're equivocating now. I'm not talking about, like, I want to stick to one, like, we're talking about the Godhead, right? We're not talking about God. We're not talking about the relationship that people have to.
I don't think that you can deny existence. I don't think you can deny existence. I don't.
Okay, no. So you are not an agnostic with respect to the Godhead. You believe that the Godhead exists.
I'm not agnostic to existence. I think you have to be a fucking idiot to be agnostic to existence. It's whether that existence is allegorical to the Christian relationship to the Godhead.
Okay.
Which is why I said attack the Christian relationship to the Godhead.
Right. See, I don't quite understand like the distinction here between like the relationship to the Godhead and the Godhead. Like I understand that there is a distinction there, but I don't quite understand why you refer to God as being the relationship and having a separate term for the Godhead for being what God is.
Our relationship would be our understanding of the greatest conceivable being, and our relationship to that, whilst the Godhead.
Right. See, I would have thought a more kind of efficient way of talking about this would be to say like this is our conception of God versus then there's actually what God is, right?
Sorry, say that again. I didn't catch that.
Well, I mean, it sounds like we're talking about the same thing. It's not like there's like a Godhead, and then there's God separately. It's more like, right, there's like God, and then there's our conceptions about God, and that's what we refer to as God. And
people would agree, but then this would relate, like this would be this is the whole thing with the kind of like indifferentism and so on. it's like I am talking about existence, but I'm talking about my inadequate understanding of existence and my relationship with it. Do you see what
See, I think when people claim things like God is omnibenevolent, I don't think they're saying my conception of God is omnibenevolent. I think they're saying God is omnibenevolent.
I think what they're saying is that God should be understood in this term because because creation requires the production of X effects, and those effects can only be explained by something which at least contains the capacity of doing Y. So like that would be really like what I would say like the average Christian's talking about. It's like I don't think the average Christian like in fact it's usually considered blasphemous to know the mind of God, right? Like
Um,
so if I was to say like I know the mind of God, so I know what it means to be all loving, I'd be considered like blasphemous a lot.
know what it means to be all loving is one thing, but saying that God is all loving is a separate thing. Like there's these presuppositions that are clearly the case in what you're talking about as God, because you're saying that he's incomprehensible at least, right?
Half of the time, Christians don't even say all loving, right? What they say is God is love.
Mm-hmm.
They say like God, like do you know what I mean? They don't really like these are the like a lot of the time they don't go like God's name is love, and what they really refer to is like and you know the thing is you say that like Christians don't mean this. Well, Christians follow the church. Like a lot of them follow the church. The largest organization within Christian, like the largest Christian institution is the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church's stance is based off Thomas Aquinas, and Thomas Aquinas's stance was that.
And yet, it's clearly not directly based on that because people don't believe what Thomas Aquinas believed. Right?
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, like the church has
influenced
since. Like, I mean, like he is the primary influence in the Catholic Church by far.
Sure. Anyway, I think like our argument is completely like semantic at this point. Like it's like I'm just saying like when people refer to this being, and I mean maybe when I say this, you're like that's not the Christian God. But when I think of like a being that is omnipotent and omnibenevolent and has these various characteristics, and their son is Jesus and they created everything and things like that, I believe that the probability of that thing existing is very low. I will have to admit that the probability of everything existing is rather high, but I think that to consider this the goalpost of this debate is
I mean like
pretty odd.
Like that said, like the best way to do it would be to attack like the relationship of Christians to the concept rather than the concept itself. Like,
well, the thing is that the concept it depends on who you're talking to, right?
Oh, I agree.
Concept of God is just literally everything. It's just like whatever everything is, that's God, right? Many other people have more specific beliefs about what God is.
Well, I mean, like my concept would be like
sure. Okay, there's. Yeah. Okay, sorry. I don't mean when I say like your concept. I'm not trying to say like it's some super niche stuff, but like I'm sure that there's a lot of theologians who agree with you. But I would say that if you just talk to some churchgoer, they're not going to say like, yes, God is just everything. So like things moving around, that's God, and like people who believe in evolution, people who believe in physicalism, people who believe that there are no souls, they're also Christians. They also believe in the same God I do. Like I'm pretty sure these aren't really what most people's conceptions are.
I don't know. I think that a lot of people, like, if anything, like I don't know if you find this, like, humility is a big part of Christianity. Like, at least it should be. At least it usually is considered a big part of Christianity. Obviously, you've got massive differences in sects of Christianity. Like not massive differences, but like considerable ones anyway, that would like, affect this, especially when you get like fundamentalists and shit. But for example, I think that fundamentalism is in and of itself like stupid, like if that's any help. But if you were to take like, for example, the average churchgoer, and you were to say like, well, tell me about God, like they'll say like, oh, he's all over in the way. What does that mean? If you were to just go like, if you were to just keep going and just go, what does that mean? What does that mean? They'll be like, I can't explain God to you. Like I can only, and then they'll really reference their relationship. They'll be like, I feel in my heart or something, and then or they'll go, like God is perfect. He's he's absolute, he's infinite. Like I can't. Do you know what I mean? I'm not God is usually what you'll get in response. So I don't know, man. I think Christians do this all the time. I just don't think that Christians like know why they're doing it.
I mean, the thing is, right, is like I know for a fact that if you go up to most Christians and you say, "Hey, would you consider me to believe in your God?" And I say, "I don't believe any souls exist. I don't think there's anything supernatural. I believe that the only things that exist are atoms." I believe that they would say, "No, you don't believe in my God." But you're saying that yes, you do believe in their God because that's part of everything.
Well, no. Well, one, I mean, like you could argue that that metaphysic would be incompatible with the notion of like maybe like it would be non-existential or something like, and which you'd be able to give like a causal explanation of everything, maybe, which would maybe like kind of make everything contingent. But I'm not sure about that. Like so you could maybe argue that that would be incompatible, but then like because I mean that belief state almost lends itself to the belief that there is no cause beyond the physical conception. There is no like first cause, like last cause, like final cause, and so on.
Right. See, it sounds like you're jumping between definitions a bit. Like on the one hand, it's like, well, God is everything. Maybe I misunderstood you when you said this, but now it also sounds like you're saying, well, God being everything is more like an entailment of the actual definition of God.
No, like God being everything. It's like with God being like existence itself. It's whether that existence itself. I mean, if we say we can have different metaphysical claims about existence itself, and if you define existence itself as like absolutely particular and non-referential to a universal from which I could say existence actually is coherent, and instead it's actually just a term, then what you've defined is like what you consider God then like wouldn't be a single simplistic being. It would be a contingent being. It would be a contingent definition of like it is this that plus like, and it would just be like 1 + 1 + 1 plus onto an infinity, when in reality what is being referenced in this definition is a simple unified substance, and that's the separation there. And that's why I said like metaphysically there might be an issue there if you were to go like, look, I think that everything is explainable as like particulars in that respect.
Okay, so it's like God is the elementary substance, the elementary particle.
It would be like elementary substance, yeah, like fundamental substance of reality, like. I think or like fundamental substance of existence, essence. Well, Thomas Aquinas literally defines his essence as existence. So like, if that's
super vague, but
yeah, well, but the like so, and then obviously there's the relationship to existence, which is an ethical relationship, really, and a spiritual relationship. Which is, I think, definable as what makes someone a Christian. Well,
maybe psychologically, but in terms of what these people actually believe, they're not just like, oh, there's all the reality and it's like elementary atoms and particles and quarks and stuff. And then like what I say as God is like my relationship with it. And it's like me in a well praying to somebody so that I don't, die in the well. Like that's not what they think of as God. They think that there's this being out there that presides over everything and creates everything and, maintains everything and so on and so forth. Like they're not just believing like there's all these atoms and stuff and that's God.
No, like I certainly don't think that they would say like these atoms. Like I certainly agree that they would not say that like a collection of particulars would be God. That's kind of like what I was saying. Like that would be like nominalism, right? Like I don't think they would say that, right? Like what they're saying is that there is a unified substance which is existence itself.
Well, what does it mean for something to be a unified substance?
Like a universal which exists, like an actual universal which exists. It is irreducible and perfect. But like, before we get onto that, like I mean that was only a side point. I just wanted to say as well, not all Christians, like for example, when you say a soul, like Christians don't necessarily believe in souls. That's quite a Platonic notion in itself. Like a lot of them inherited that, but I think that just goes to show like a lot of Christians don't understand their own religion even. Do you know what I mean? Like Christians usually like are like not necessarily materialists, but they do believe them like a lot of them believe them like the essence in the material, right? Like what is you is part and parcel to your body and your physical experience of reality, right? Which is why you get like Higgs replica theory, where if you're like you are actually reincarnated in your physical form in heaven, and that is just a perfect absolute copy of you. So like that like so like you know so and then you get like different variations of this. So like in terms of like metaphysical claims about what existence is, like they can lend themselves like, so if you were to say like, look, there is no such thing as existence as a unified like absolute, like that would be a way you could argue against this. Like if you were taking the nominalist route, like nah, what are you fucking talking about? There is no such thing as existence. It's not a predicate. Being is not a predicate. And then that's hard to fight. Like, and then I'd say like being is a predicate, and then you say being is not a predicate, and then I'm in like well basically we're like 50-50, right? Like or like well actually we could be more or less 50-50 if you could give an argument that was better or worse, like you know, for nominalism versus something like or like something like I don't know, like a realism. So if you could give an argument for like conceptualism, terminalism, or nominalism, and not a realism for universals, then yeah, I'd probably be like quite snookered in that, and that would be that is an actual argument against Thomas Aquinas. So, but that's an argument against like his conception of God.
Anyway,
or like,
I mean, as I say, like the argument is semantic, right? It's like okay, well, so we've got these two different conceptions of gods, the one that I'm talking about and the one you're talking about. I agree that the one you're talking about definitely exists. I couldn't fathom anybody saying that it doesn't exist. But then separately, there's like the conception that I think is much more popular, but that is a semantic disagreement. That's just literally like, oh, I think we should mean this by God, and I think you should mean, all right. I'm not gonna like, I think we should just split it into two things and say, I agree with you on that one. Now, do you agree with me on this one? Do you agree that a being who has all of these attributes, who is omnipotent, who has the properties of aseity and eternity and omnibenevolence and graciousness and holiness and immanence and immutability and so on and so forth, all the things that people believe about God, that God gave birth in some way to Jesus, or is in some sense the father of Jesus, or that Jesus is God's corporeal form, and all of the other claims made about God, including that he created the universe and so on. Do you believe that a being that has these attributes is highly improbable?
Well, to kind of just do this, I think that, like, if you were to say, like, for example, if you were to take like biblical story to be fundamentally true, as in like an accurate historical description of events that really did happen, then they are describable, and like, for example, fundamentally in the definitions of the words, like it like, yeah, I would say that's highly improbable. I would actually argue against fundamentalism in that respect and say that it's just not even the way language works. Like, we couldn't, and I would argue for like a hermeneutic approach to religion. Then like, so that like, if in that respect, if you say like, if someone was to take a fundamentalist Christian view or a fundamentalist theistic view, and yeah, I'd say that like that's highly improbable. I'd in fact say they were wrong. Like, I wouldn't even say they were improbable. I would say they are actually wrong. Now, if you were to say that, let's say, like, I don't know, like you say omnibenevolence, omnipotence, these qualities which are attributable to God, I'd say that the qualities themselves are universals. It's not like, it's like you're predicating an infinite of an infinite. I'm not sure what my stance would necessarily be on the predicate, because I think it's kind of not an empty signifier, but I think the signification is outside of the being itself. If you understand, like, it's predicable of something outside of the being itself. In saying something is omnipowerful, omnipotent, you're saying that it has a relationship which can actualize any and all possibility. Now, and since what's possible is separate from what is necessary, it's not predicable of itself. Do you see what I'm saying? So when they say like that, they're not descriptions. I wouldn't necessarily describe them as descriptions of the thing. if they were saying that these are descriptions of the thing, I will say you're right. If that makes it easier. If they're saying God is and then X, Y, Z, then yeah, you're right. They're wrong. If they are instead predicates of our relationship with God, and they're actually descriptions of or like not even allegorical, but let's say descriptions of divine action, then they aren't necessarily wrong. Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure, I guess, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about the relationship with God thing. I'm not sure where I stand on that, but it sounds like we agree on the content of the proposition as described, or like as I intended it. We agree that when you say something like God is omnibenevolent, God is omniscient, God has all these properties, there's this being out there that has all these attributes. The existence of that being is highly improbable, and it sounds like we agree on that. And the only disagreement we have is about what things we should call God, and I don't really care to talk about it.
What the proposition was really, if I find it, let's see.
A Christian God is almost certainly non-existent.
A Christian God is certainly almost non-existent. The definition I gave you was a Christian definition, one of the largest ones. You said yourself that you couldn't say that it was necessarily non-existent. What you then described was what I would consider to be maybe a particular Christian definition, or which which I think is fair to say that is less likely to be true. And then but that depends on whether they, again, actually attribute those things to God, or really mean them in either an allegorical way or as a description of God's relationship with us. So even if those Christians mean something from which you've interpreted wrongly, then I would say that your argument doesn't follow. If they do mean what you've said, then yes, your argument follows.
Right, exactly. So my proposition is true of the thing I'm talking about. And you understand what I'm talking about. You agree with me that it follows of that. I agree that it does not follow of the thing that you're talking about. And the only way to resolve between us who is correct on the proposition would be if we somehow resolved our semantic disagreement here. But I think it's totally irrelevant. I think it's fine to just say, we'll just leave it to a vote. It's fine. We agree on the content. We could have a separate debate maybe about what we should call God, but yeah, I'm not really concerned with that right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is, in terms of the proposition, the only thing I would say is that, I guess the reason I would say that, why I would say that, when you say Christian God, I would say that it would be in the future, in case you ever come up against someone who's as pedantic, semantic, and absolutely annoying as me. Just be very specific in the prop that you mean a particular engagement or notion of a Christian God, rather than a Christian God.
The Christian God, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's a very broad. Yeah.
There's obviously a million different conceptions of it. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, so the reason, just as kind of a closing statement, because I think now, given that we both agree on the substance, the only the thing that I could pose as a closing statement is essentially just my brief argument for why I think my interpretation of the term the Christian God is better than yours. So I would just say I think that my description of the Christian God as being this particular being that exists perhaps outside of reality or within it or something that is, omnipresent and omnibenevolent and created the universe and is omnipotent and so on and so forth. I think this is a closer representation of what people mean when they say God in general. If we took the average person, I would say that if we took the average of people who know what they're talking about Christianity, it would probably not be the consensus definition. I think that what you're describing would be a lot closer if you were in a theological circles or talking to anybody who's read Aquinas or any of this. But I think when we're describing what do most people mean by Christianity and the Christian God, I think that my my kind of definition is a lot closer. There you go.
Yeah. I just say I do appreciate your argument. I can see where you're coming from. And I think that, in many ways, that might be, it very well would be an argument against that kind of defined, God, where he has attributable qualities from which an individual could know or not know. I guess what I would add is that the average everyday Christian, I would say, definitely does engage with God in this way, whether they know it or not, through their churches, through their institutions, which are, have had a great intellectual discourse under their foundations. I mean, maybe not some of the American ones, especially like some of those where I watched someone try to tell, like the other day about COVID vaccines and how they're not going to play these Democrat games in these churches and shit. So churches in like, especially like certain like very like weird sects, yeah, okay, that foundation is by a bunch of idiots and even cultists sometimes. But like some of the organizations I was mentioning were like the Catholic Church, like the Church of England, like these churches have, and I mean, like, depending on the even like Protestant churches, as well, which I'm not as familiar with, but they would all have similar conceptions of God, from which they would structure their rituals and their teachings, from which the individuals then adhere to, whether they have as developed the knowledge or not. Now, that would mean that individuals, when they talk about them, may accidentally or wrongly describe their beliefs or like their understanding. They may be wrong about what the teachings were, for one, but they also may attribute things accidentally and use poor language rather than actually describe what they mean. Which is why I think when you do press Christians, a lot of the time they just go like, "I don't know, God's perfect," or God is love, or God is everything, he's perfect, and they describe them in these infinites. And when they do give a description, they do go, he's omnipotent, he's omnibenevolent, and they're describing a relationship to creation and the act of creation, very much in particular. So yeah, I think that the average Christian does engage with the definition that I've gave. I think the average Christian may be unaware of the scholasticism and the debate that underpins it, but I don't think that is overall relevant to whether we can have certainty, that whether we can be absolutely certain a Christian God exists or not. Since if the Christian God is what Christians believe in and what Christians are discussing and going to church about and engaging with, then the Christian God of the Catholic Church is certainly not almost certain not to exist, or the Christian God of most of these churches which have a deep scholastic or deep academic foundation. So I think that your argument does work on a particular Christian God, or a particular conception of a Christian God, which would probably be fundamental and literal rather than allegorical and enlightened. So yeah, thank you for the debate though.